As we mentioned earlier, we have entered into a season of Lent. Now, I know that's not typically a thing that Baptists talk about, but like we said Wednesday night, we baptized it. Full immersion. It's ours now. We kind of did Lent, Ash Wednesday, the way we chose to. We said we didn't do ashes on the forehead. We came back here. If you weren't here, I want to let you know what we did. We had a section off. We had a black curtain. We talked about the weight of our sin. We talked about in the Old Testament, Ezekiel 16, which is a very gritty and real passage in the Bible. You'll wrestle with it if you read it. It talks about how desperately we needed God. And as we talked about the weight of our sin, we talked about how when Jesus was crucified on that cross, the temple curtain split from top to bottom. And so we went through that curtain, and on the other side of it, we talked about Jesus. And a life with Jesus is sweet, so we had cupcakes. And right where the nail marks would have went through Jesus' wrist, I had my two little girls do little stamps on everybody's wrist of little hearts, because we are Jesus' Valentine. So that's kind of how we started off the Lent season. I want to kind of tag off of something Barbara said a moment ago. Sometimes we say we're going to sacrifice something during the Lent season. But we might not be able to do it for that whole 40 days. So I want to challenge you on something, and you're going to laugh when I say this. I said this to somebody else, and they kind of laughed. Try and go a whole day without saying anything negative. That's hard.
Yeah, it is.
That's hard. Now, if you can do that, here's the other one. The next day, try and go a whole day without thinking anything negative. That's harder. Because we can keep stuff in our mouth. We can keep it in here. Say, I'm not going to voice it out. I'm not just talking about those thoughts that cross through your head, but those things that you meditate on and say, oh, if I could only let that person know what I think of them. Or the negative thing, or you see something on TV. Just don't watch the news that day. That's hard. That doesn't have anything to do with the sermon this morning, but I just wanted to share that. You might challenge yourself sometime during this preparation for Easter. Can I go a whole day without saying anything negative and realize how hard it is to do that? I was sharing with somebody in the hospital. We were talking about being around germs and the flu and everything. If you tell someone not to touch their face all day, then you'll realize how many times we touch our face. Well, it's the same thing with the saying things negative. You realize how many times during the course of the day we say something negative. And you'll be surprised if you challenge yourself to that for just one day. Just challenge yourself to that in one day and go, oh gosh, I had no idea how nasty I could be until I tried to stop. Getting into this Lent season, as we work our way up to Easter, we've been talking a lot in Genesis, and we've been talking about Abraham. We've led from the beginning of creation of Abraham. We've went off into some other topics, some other books of the Bible, but we've been spending a lot of time with Genesis, and we're going to wrap that up soon. And we're going to be going into Exodus for a short time. Now, one of the things that's so important about going into Exodus is because when you think about that Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples, they didn't call it the Last Supper. They called it Passover. It was a Seder meal. And if you were an observant Jew in that time, you did this every year. And everything on the plate, everything on the table, every toast you made, everything was really symbolic. And so, if you were an observant Jew who read the story of the Last Supper, you would read it differently than you and I read it, because you get all that symbolism. Jesus says something, does something, you say, oh, I know what he did there. I get what he did there. That was very subtle. Well, it's so subtle that it gets lost on us who didn't grow up Jewish. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to talk about the stories that lead up to that, and as we get to Easter, the significance of the redemption and the atonement that Jesus brought, going from the Old Testament all the way up to the Gospels. We're going to tie that into the Gospels and in Exodus. But before we get to Exodus, still a little bit more story I want to tell in Genesis. We're not going to tell them all, but there's this one story, my goodness, I really want us to talk about. But before we can get into this story, I need to give you a little bit of background. We're going to kind of fast track some history here. We're going to go through several decades of history. So if you lose attention, you might lose some detail here. But just a few background details to get us into today's story. So God tells Abraham, we've been talking about this part, God tells Abraham that he's going to have a son in his old age, and that son is going to have more sons, and he's going to have more family, and from all of these descendants, there are going to be so many descendants, there's going to be more descendants than there are stars in the sky or sand on the earth. And so that son that is born comes about 25 years later. God makes the promise, about 25 years pass. Abraham's 100 years old and he has his son, Isaac. And so we've been talking about that. Isaac, though, grows up himself, and he has 2 children, Jacob and Esau. And they were twins. Now, in that culture, whoever was the firstborn, even if it was twins, whoever was the firstborn, they get a double portion of the inheritance. That was just the way it went for the firstborn child. You got more inheritance than any other child. So Esau is born first. And when he's born, he's got so much hair on him, he looks like he's wrapped in a wool blanket. So they name him Esau, which means hairy. If you've ever known anybody named Harry, that's not really an original term. That went all the way back to the Bible. They named Jacob, because when he's born, he's clutching at Esau's heel. And so his name means he who clutches at the heel. It means a few other things. It means trickster or deceiver. Like he's up to no good. He's trying to fight for his place to be first in line. Even when he's born, he's trying to get first in line so he can get that double portion. This kind of defines a lot of the story for Jacob. So Esau grew up to be a great hunter. He was all the time out in the woods. He was all the time catching something, bringing back some wild game. And man, his father, Isaac, loved that. He loved eating some fresh venison. So Esau was daddy's favorite. Jacob, on the other hand, he was inside most of the time. He's probably in the kitchen a lot of the time. And he was a mama's boy. He's mama's favorite. So he's in the kitchen watching some Food Network, learning how to make stew. He probably kind of pale complexion. He's inside most of the time. Now, when Isaac gets older, Isaac gets to the point where he says, I don't have much time left on this earth. I need to bestow my blessing to my children while I still can. So he gets Esau. He says, Esau, I want you to go out hunting. I want you to bring back some of that food you know I like so much. When you get back, I'm going to give you a blessing. Well, Mama hears this. Remember, Jacob is Mama's favorite. Mama overhears this and says, Jacob, stop playing video games. Come over here. You're so pale. Okay, Jacob, you need to go out, and here's what's going to happen. Esau is out hunting, and he's going to bring back some food for your father. But realize your father is kind of old, and he doesn't see anymore. So this is what we're going to do. I got some venison over here in the fridge from last time. We're going to pop that in the microwave, heat it up. I want you to put a little bit of fur on your arms, and you're going to pretend to be your brother, so you're going to get the blessing, which is a little bit deceitful. You're starting to wonder, where did Jacob get his deceitful nature from? So he's going to do this deceitfulness to his father, and it works. He goes in there, kind of tries to disguise his voice a little bit. His father can't see him. He goes in with the hairy arms, the plate full of food, and so Isaac gives him the blessing that should have went to the oldest brother. Now, this is the first time that Jacob stole something from Esau. There was one occasion when Esau was out hunting. He was out in the woods all day, didn't have any trail mix with him or anything. He comes inside, he's starving. He said, Jacob, why don't you make me some of that stew I see you stirring over there? Pour me a bowl of it. Jacob's crafty, says, I could do that. But in exchange, I want your birthright. Esau's starving. He says, well, what good is it to me if I starve to death? I don't know how many of you have thought you were starving. You weren't really starving, but I guess it played with his head. So Jacob kind of tricks Esau into stealing the birthright. And now he has stolen the blessing. So Esau comes back. He says, Dad, I brought you some of that venison that you like so much. Isaac says, yeah, I already had a plate. What are you talking about? I already gave you your blessing. What are you talking about? I was out hunting. He said, well, if I didn't give it to you, who did I give it to? Uh-oh. Starts piecing it together. Esau starts figuring out what's going on. He says, if it's the last thing I do, I'm going to kill Jacob. Rebecca, Mom, overhears this and says, oh, Jacob, he ain't playing this time. You better hit the road. You better run fast. You better get out of here. He has had enough. He's got his mind out to kill you. So Jacob runs. He runs and runs, and in his travels, he falls in love with a woman named Rachel. He makes a deal with her father. I will work for you for 7 years in order that I might marry this girl. Okay, fine. So he works for Laban for 7 years. Laban pulls a trick on him. Wedding night, gets the other daughter, the older daughter. We don't know exactly what's going on. It sounds like she has a lazy eye. She's not the daughter that he wanted to marry. She's got a veil on. It's nighttime. He's been tricked. So the trickster has been tricked by Laban. Laban says, oh, that's just our custom around here. That's great. That's just our custom around here, that we marry off the older daughter first. You want to marry this other daughter that you wanted in the first place, you got to work another 7 years. So Jacob works another 7 years in order that he might marry the girl he wanted to be with to begin with. So he's worked 14 years for her. Laban keeps on changing things up for him. He tries to cheat Jacob. Jacob cheats Laban. He finds a way to get the best of the flock for himself. He tries to leave. Laban won't let him leave. So he sneaks off during the night. He takes his family, all of his goods, all the best flock. He runs off. Laban catches up with him. They have an awkward conversation. They come to a truce. Say, okay, we've got a border here. You don't cross over my side of the border. I won't cross over your side of the border. We'll leave each other alone. Deal. And that's what leads us up to Genesis 32. You see, Jacob, the deceiver, has been on the run from his brother as the cost for all his deception over the years, especially that last one. He's had this back and forth game of deception going on with his uncle Laban. And he had to run out of there as well. So he can't go back. He can't go back where he came from because Laban's back there and he made a deal. I can't go this direction. I got to go forward. Well, what's out ahead of him? His brother who wants to kill him. So he's got to figure out something. He better figure it out fast. So in Genesis 32, starting with the first verse, and I'm reading this, I believe this is the Message or the CEV translation that I've got, and we're going to switch over to New King James in a minute. And Jacob went on his way. Angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, oh, God's camp. And he named the place Mahanaim, which means campground. Then Jacob sent messengers on ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir and Edom. He instructed them, tell my master Esau this, a message from your servant Jacob. I've been staying with Laban and couldn't get away until now. You hear a little bit of deception in this and there. I wanted to come see you, but I couldn't. I've acquired cattle and donkeys and sheep, also men and women servants. I'm telling you all this, my master, hoping for your approval. So Jacob gets out ahead of the situation. He knows his brother probably wants to kill him. That was the last thing he said. And he knows that the blessing that he stole involved prosperity. He was going to have a lot of stuff. He says, I know my brother's going to wonder about what all stuff I've acquired over the years. I've got all this wealth. I've got all this family. I know that's going to be the first thing was, hey, he stole my blessing. How'd it turn out for him? So he lays out all his cards on the table. Says, okay, let's just get it all out there. Let's just get the message out to my brother. I'm coming to meet you. This is everything I've got. And he sends out word about that ahead of time through some messengers. Verse 6, the messengers came back to Jacob and said, we talked to your brother Esau, and he's on his way to meet you, but he has 400 men with him. Jacob was scared, very panicked. He divided his people, sheep, cattle, and camels into 2 camps. He thought, if Esau comes on the first camp and attacks it, the other camp has a chance to get away. So notice this. Esau, by the time the messengers get to him, he's already got 400 men with him. The messengers come and say, hey, your brother's here. And he said, oh, I know. Oh, I know. I got 400 guys behind me. I didn't just scrounge them up in the moment. I knew before y'all got here. My brother's in town. I'm ready. So Jacob has been wondering, I hope enough time has passed. My brother wants to forgive me. He wants to let bygones be bygones. I hope he's not out for blood anymore. This word comes back to him. He says, oh, it's what I worst feared. My brother's out to get me. He hasn't gotten over it. So he's out for blood. Verse 9. Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become 2 camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. So there's a couple things to notice here when we look at this passage. Remember, Jacob is a master sly talker. He's conniving. He's conniving with people. He can talk himself out of any situation. He can talk himself into getting what he wants. He does that with people, and he even does that with God. Now, I know y'all are looking for the life application here, but I know none of y'all try to sly talk God and connive him, so I'm going to move on. So first of all, in this prayer, he makes appeal to God, to the God of his fathers. And that's good. He should do that. You are the God of my granddaddy. You are the God of my daddy. And then he moves on with the prayer. And we say, hold on now. Jacob, is he your God? He's the God of your forefathers. Is he your God, though? Sometimes we think, well, granddaddy went to church, daddy went to church, I'm saved. Is he your God? Do you have a personal relationship with him? We're going to get to that. And the next thing he says, you remember how you told me to come here? And how you said you would treat me well. So he repeats that at the end of his prayer too. You said, I will treat you well. I will make your descendants like the sands of the sea. Now, have any of you had your kids or your grandkids do this? You promise them something, they lock that away. You'd be in the car with them. Say, yeah, when we get home, I'll give you a piece of candy. You forget, you get busy, you forget. 2 days pass. Hey, Daddy, you remember on Tuesday at 6:17 you were promising me a lollipop of roughly these dimensions? Are you kidding me? You remembered every single detail about that. You can't remember to clean your room. But you remembered every single detail about that promise. And even here as adults, we make the same thing. We do the same thing. When there's something that we want, we know chapter, line, and verse exactly what it is God's promise for us that suits us. Maybe not the parts where we have to give up something, but we know exactly, in exacting detail, that which benefits us. So Jacob is saying, God, you said it. You said. So you have to honor this, right? You have to honor this. You can't let anything bad happen to me, right? God, you don't lie. I know your promises are true. So you have to honor this. You have to keep me safe. And so in this prayer, he praises God for the provision he has had so far. He says, I'm not worthy of it. And that's true. That's a good prayer. He's not worthy of the provision God has made to him. And based on that, he says, I'm pleading for you to save my life. And maybe I'm reading too much into this. But as he makes his prayer, it sounds to me like, God, please don't let my brother come and kill me. The wife and children too, yeah. Almost like an afterthought. And based on what Jacob has done so far up to this, that seems consistent with his MO, that Jacob looks out for himself first. Jacob will do anything he can to get what he wants. He looks after himself first. It's not that he doesn't care about the wives and the children, but he looks out for himself before anything else, before God, before family. He looks out for himself first. That tends to be what he does. And so he divides the camp into two camps. He says there's a group over here and there's a group over here. And if one gets attacked, the other one might see it and have time to escape safely. See, all evidence inside this text seems to point to the fact that Jacob's in the other camp. Jacob's in the rear camp. He's handing notes to people. He's sending notes to people, their marching orders. Hey, y'all go out in front with the sword and the shield and protect me. I'll be back here safe. Thanks a lot, Jacob. There you go, buddy. I'm a human shield for you. That's wonderful. Verse 13. He spent the night there. And from what he had with him, he selected a gift for his brother Esau. 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 female camels with their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, and 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the care of his servants, each herd by itself, and said to his servants, Go ahead of me, and keep some space between the herds. He instructed the one in the lead. When my brother Esau meets you and asks, Who do you belong to, and where are you going, and who owns all these animals in front of you? Then you are to say, They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. He also instructed the second, the third, and all the others who followed their herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him, and be sure to say your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. Later, when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. So Jacob, the sly talker, who could talk himself out of any situation he's wheeling and dealing, says, let me butter my brother up. Let me get him ready. Let me put him on his best attitude so that when he sees me, maybe he won't kill me. Let me talk myself out of this one like I've talked myself out of so many other things. Verse 22. And he arose that night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. He took them, sent them over the brook, and sent over what he had. Then Jacob was left alone. So here's Jacob, the trickster. He's accumulated wealth and family. He sent them all on ahead of him. He's hoping they don't get killed. He's hoping he doesn't get killed. And here he is in the camp, left completely alone. He's fully expecting he might be killed tomorrow. When he runs into his brother, he might be killed tomorrow. He might be killed tonight. His brother or someone he sends might be waiting on him, might be ready to slip up on him in the night. He's probably losing a lot of sleep. He probably doesn't even feel safe sleeping in that camp. And we're going to switch over to the New King James Version for a moment because the way that the words are capitalized in the New King James Version, not all the translations handle the capitalization there. So I want you to notice in this translation, anytime you see man capitalized or he capitalized, that's referring to God. It's not just some random person. It's referring to God. So Jacob, in verse 24, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Josh, come up here for a second.
Josh.
So the reason... No. The reason that man is capitalized here is because it's referring to God. It's not just some random wanderer. God shows up, and he's ready for a fight. When we like to think of God as how Jesus describes, as a mother bird taking her young under her wing. But here, Jacob is sleeping, just out of nowhere. Now, earlier in the Bible, Genesis 28, Jacob has taken a nap, and he dreamt of a ladder going from the earth up to heaven. And he saw angels coming up and down from that ladder. And he heard God tell him, this land around you, you will be receiving that land as an inheritance. When Jacob woke up in Genesis 28, he said, surely God was in this place, and I didn't know it. Now, what a thing to be in the presence of God and not know it. I wonder if that ever happened to us. Well, now, God is not only here, in Genesis 32, he's not only here, but he shows up for a fight. Jacob doesn't know it. He's preparing to fight his brother. He probably thinks it's his brother Esau who snuck up on him in the night. He can't see anything. He can't tell. He doesn't know who snuck up on him. So what's happening on the outside of Jacob really mirrors what's happening on the inside of Jacob. Because he doesn't know what he's going to run into tomorrow when he runs into his brother. He doesn't know what he's up against when God wrestles with him. Just like he doesn't know what he's up against when he encounters his brother tomorrow, who he hasn't seen in years. His brother could be a completely different person by now. Who knows? What is he going to run into? Who or what am I up against? With God? With his brother? He's faced with all kinds of uncertainty. Now, have you ever felt like that? Maybe you feel that way now. Now, you might be a new Christian, or maybe you've been a Christian for years and years and years. But we're all subject to these seasons of life, where there's these seasons of uncertainty. Maybe you're there now. Or maybe you know what it's like to be in one of those seasons of uncertainty, where you say, God, I don't know where this is all going. I don't know where you're taking me. I don't know what we're going to do when we get there. I don't understand this. I don't understand why this is happening to me, God. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you're doing it. But I'm just holding on to you. I don't understand, but I'm just holding on to you, God. Now this passage, where we're going to spend most of our time this morning, is this passage. And again, in the New King James Version, because I want you to notice every time it says he capitalized or it says man capitalized, it's not talking about just some guy. It's talking about God. Starting with verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he saw that he did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of his hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, saying, "Tell me your name, I pray." And he said, "Why is it that you ask about my name?" And he blessed him there. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Now this is not the normal way that we're used to experiencing God, or at least thinking about God. Some of us have experienced God this way. We've been kind of tackled by God out of the blue, but we're not used to thinking of him in that way. We typically think about Jesus in the New Testament, who comes down in the flesh. And we say, that's the first time that God ever came down. No, it's not. God comes down here and wrestles with Jacob. And different scholars, different commentators have said, well, it's possible that God in the flesh here could have been Jesus. We don't know. We know that God came down in some form. That he shows up at night to wrestle Jacob. And I want for you to notice here that the scripture says, don't miss this, the scripture says that God saw he could not win against Jacob. What does that mean? The verse says, when he saw that he could not prevail against him. Different translations say, he saw he couldn't win. He saw he couldn't beat him. What does that mean? Does it mean that God was holding back? God comes down in a human form. Does he kind of look at Jacob and he looks at his stats and says, okay, I'm going to make my stats a little bit lower. I'm going to handicap myself for this round. Probably not. It seems odd, right? It seems odd because we serve a God who spoke creation into existence, who can calm the storm, who can walk on water, who heals the sick, who raises the dead. He's all powerful. And he gets into a match with Jacob, the deceiver, the trickster. And you kind of say, God, you going to let this punk beat you? That doesn't seem right. How is that possible? I want you to wrestle with this text just a little bit. Does this ever happen in your life? In what context can a person wrestle with God and God not win? Think about it for a second. When do you ever stand toe to toe with God and God does not win? It's the struggle over whether or not you're going to follow God's will or your own will. See, God gives us free will. You can choose to follow him. You can choose to follow someone or something else. He does not force you into compliance. Because you see, true love is mutual. I choose to love you. You didn't force me to love you. If someone locks you in a basement, puts a gun to your head and says, you will love me, that's not love. That's a psycho. Get out of that basement as fast as you can. Run. But God gives us the freedom to choose him or to reject him. We have that choice. Are we going to live God's way? We're going to live our own way. Now there's this old Frank Sinatra song that a lot of people love. I struggle with it a little bit. This old Frank Sinatra song that says, I did it my way. See, it's hard for me to listen to that song just a little bit. It's a song about a guy who's approaching the end of his life, and he looks back on all of his life and says, I did it my way. Just a snippet of that song. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the byway, and more, much more than this, I did it my way. See, the reason that's hard for me, because I've done a lot of funerals. Now, fortunately, most of the funerals I've done have been for great saints. Like we just did the funeral for Barbara Pullum. And it felt good to honestly be able to say, I know she was a woman of faith. I saw it. I knew she was saved. She had a wonderful testimony. And here, during her life and even in death, we can use her as an example of a Christ follower. It feels good to know that we're going to see her again. It feels good to know that she has a legacy that we get to see passed on. That same kind of faith, we can have that same kind of faith that Miss Barbara had. But I've also, unfortunately, done some funerals for people who weren't saved. And you can see it in the eyes of the Christians in the room, they say that that's the last time I'm going to see them. I'm not going to see them again in heaven because they weren't saved. They didn't have that saving relationship with Jesus Christ. It's heartbreaking. So when I hear that old Frank Sinatra song, I think about the funerals I've done for people who were not saved, who can look back at the end of their life and say, I did it my way. And I think, well, that's not really something to boast about. If I did it God's way, or at least part of the time I did it God's way. I tried. I gave my life to Him, and maybe I messed up, but I tried to live my life God's way. That at the end of my life, He can say to me, well done, good and faithful servant. That's what I want at the end of my life, is for God to say that to me, not that I said I did it my way. I plotted my course every step. But looking back at our text, Scripture says that God notices He can't win this fight. The Message reads, he couldn't beat him. The New Living Translation says he could not win. Jacob guy's stubborn, isn't he? He's in this wrestling match with God. He just will not submit to God, not completely. Now he'll cry out to God when he needs him. We just saw that. Don't let my brother kill me. Don't let him kill my family. But he hasn't fully submitted to God yet. See, we have some Christians in the world like that today. Maybe that describes you, I don't know. Be honest with yourself here. Be honest with God here. See, fortunately, I can't read minds. I can't broadcast your thoughts out over the loudspeakers in the room. So be honest with yourself, with God here. Nobody else can hear it. That internal dialogue you have with God. Is your relationship with God based mostly around what you get from God, with little to no giving yourself in submission to Him? Is He in your heart just God in foxhole? When you're down in the trenches, it's really easy to make promises to God. But when things are good, when things are going okay, can He still have you? Even when you don't have a reason to cry out to Him, can He still have you? Will you still fully submit to God? So, God has not got Jacob yet. Sure, God might have Jacob pinned down, but He doesn't have his heart yet. So what does God do? He merely touches Jacob's hip. He doesn't hit it with a rock. He doesn't body slam him down. He just touches Jacob's hip, and it breaks. A timeout. Flag on the play. Unnecessary roughness. It doesn't seem like something fair for God to do. If you were Jacob, you'd say, God, I didn't want to wrestle you. I didn't ask for this. Why would you break my hip? That's hard to fathom, right? How could a loving God, a compassionate God, touch me in ways that break me? Because He can. You see, God loves us so much that He will use any tool in His toolbox to get us right in relationship with Him. He knows that being outside of His will isn't good for us. Now, He's not going to force our will. He's not going to force us to choose right. But He'll tweak this. He'll break this. He'll break us at just the right time in just the right place to get our hearts to Him, so that we'll cry out to Him, so that we will return to Him. He won't force our choice, but He can influence a little bit and say, I'm going to break this way. I'm going to break in this way. He stands over the sidelines and says, are you ready to stop fighting me? Are you ready to submit to me? Look at what happens here. Jacob stops fighting. And if we look at verse 26, God says to Jacob, let go of me because the sun is coming up. So that tells us, and don't miss this, that Jacob has stopped fighting God. And now he's just holding on to God. Now, I bet some of you have lived that. You said to God, okay, I give. I'm done fighting with you. I'm tired of it. I can't win against you. I'm tired of fighting you. Okay, what do you want? I'll give it to you. What do you want? You can have all of me. I'm tired of fighting you. But some of you haven't always been saved. You might have been saved for many years, but you can think back to a time where you say, I wasn't always saved. Or maybe you were saved and you say, I didn't always act like I was saved. Sometimes God breaks us Sometimes he lets us go out and make some mistakes. We make some poor choices. He allows us. We have that freedom of choice, and he allows us to exercise that freedom and to struggle and to realize it's not going to get us anywhere. We're not going to win in life doing that. And he allows us to come to the point where we're receptive to that moment when God breaks us, and we will call out to him. We'll cry out, say, I give up. And what we're prepared to give is anything, including ourselves, in submission to him. As we cry out and we hold on to God like Jacob did. Now, when I was a kid, I used to wrestle with my dad. And, who am I kidding? I'm from South Carolina, and I was born in the 80s. We wrestled. So it was in the 80s. There was this joke floating around at the time. Now, in today's culture, we would call it a meme. We didn't have memes back then. We didn't have the internet. But there was this joke that you saw on T-shirts a lot about the big dog and the little dog. I think we have a picture of the big dog. This was actually a T-shirt brand for a while. And the idea was, as a man, you wanted to be like the big dog. You wanted to be large and in charge. You didn't want to be like the little dog. Think about the Taco Bell dog, if you remember those old commercials. You didn't want to be like the little dog. Not having any control, weak. You didn't want to be like that. So, I'm going to embarrass myself thoroughly for y'all this morning as I tell this story for your sake. I hope the message sinks in, because I'm going to embarrass myself over this. But when I was a kid, there was a time when I was a kid and I was wrestling with my dad. As I got older, I was able to pin him down. I was able to win, but not at first when I was littler. He was able to pin me down a whole lot easier. And so we had this spiel. Whoever would get the other one down, we had this spiel, we said. We'd make the other one repeat it. Kind of a rub it in their face kind of thing, whoever won. And so when I was littler, it was Dad doing this to me for a while. He would hold me down and he'd say, "Who am I?" "Dad, you're the big dog." "What does that make you?" Tighten up his grip on my arm. Okay. Makes me the little dog. He'd say, "Where do little dogs live?" So, I'm not saying it. I'm not. Tighten up his grip again. Say, "I'm not letting you go until you say it." Say, "I'm a little dog and I live in a coffee can. My occupation is being scared." Then he'd let me go. I can't tell you how glad I was when I got older and I could make him say that. Oftentimes, we're not ready to surrender. We're not ready to submit until we're pinned down. There's nowhere to go. God breaks us. And he leans over us and says, "Are you ready to give up? Are you ready to stop fighting me? Are you ready to submit to my will?" See, we serve a God who heals, who protects, who covers over us and covers over our sins. We also serve a God who can break you in just the right place. Now, we said earlier that Jacob has had at least one other experience that proves that he doesn't always know when he's in the presence of God. He doesn't know it now either. He thinks he might be wrestling his brother or somebody his brother sent. But the moment that God touches his hip and breaks it just with a touch, Jacob realizes, says, "Oh, no mere man can do that to me. This is not some guy that just wandered in from the desert. This is not the hand of my brother. This is the hand of God that just did this to me. Nobody else can do it like that." So, something we know about God from other stories in the Bible is that you cannot look at his face and live. That he is so holy, he's so righteous, and we are so unholy, we are so unrighteous, that if we look upon the majesty of God, we look at his face this side of heaven, then we will surely die. So the next thing God says is really something for Jacob's protection. Jacob, who now suddenly realizes who he's dealing with, he's dealing with God. God says, "Let me go. The sun's coming up." And he could have just as well said, "Look, Jacob, I know you figured this out. I know you know you're wrestling with God. And you also know that when daylight comes and you see my face, you're toast. You're done. For your own sake, Jacob, you gotta let me go." But remember, Jacob's stubborn. "I'm not letting you go. Not unless you bless me." Man, Jacob really loves a good blessing, doesn't he? He's gone through a whole lot to get a blessing. He stole the birthright from his brother Esau with a bowl of some stew. He deceived his father to steal the blessing from Esau. He was deceived by Laban, but he also stole from Laban too. Now here he is. He's wrestling with God. And he's willing to risk his life to get this next blessing, the blessing from God. But this time he's different. This time is so different. He's not saying, God, I know you came in here with your wallet, and I know your wallet's thick, and I'm not letting you go until I reach in your pocket and pull that wallet out. He's not saying, God, I want you to bless me by giving me a lot of family and a lot of possessions in the land. God already gave him that. He doesn't need for anything. He doesn't want for anything. He wants a different kind of blessing. What's going on here? Jacob realizes something. He realizes something that we need to realize this morning. That the same God who can break him can also bless him. That the God who has broken you may deliver a blessing in that time, in that brokenness. You might be going through something right now, and God might be drawing you closer to him. You might be suffering, but if you look for it, God might just have a blessing for you in the midst of that suffering. If you will receive it, if you're ready to receive it, there can be a blessing in the struggle. So Jacob's priorities have shifted in this moment. He doesn't want to ask God for stuff. He's got plenty of stuff. No, he's going to ask God for the real blessing now. He's faced the prospect of losing all this stuff, but he wants a blessing that's greater than all of that. God asked Jacob, what is your name? And remember earlier in the Bible, there are great places where God asks a question he already knows the answer to, in order that the person he's asking might understand something about themselves, who they are, and what context they're in. He did that to Adam and Eve when they sinned. He said, where are you? How'd you get there? Not because he didn't know, but because he wanted them to see what they had done, why they did it, and what place they put themselves in. So Jacob says, I'm Jacob. If we get right down to it, he could have kind of extrapolated out the meaning of his name. You want to know who I am? I'm Jacob. I'm the trickster. I'm the deceiver. I'm the one that plays pranks on people, that connives to get my own way. God says, not anymore. You want a blessing? I'm going to give you a new identity. See, we are not defined by our past. We're defined by God, who writes our future. So God gives him a new name, a new identity. Now your name is Israel, which means you struggled with God and prevailed. So Jacob asked the same question. Tell me your name. Now Jacob isn't asking because he doesn't know who he's dealing with. He knows he's dealing with God. But he asked in the same way that Moses asked in Exodus chapter 3. When he was at that burning bush and he met with God. He said, when I get back, I got to tell people about this. I met with God, but what am I going to tell them your name is? See, Jacob wants a deeper relationship with God. All that other stuff doesn't matter. He's risked the prospect of losing all the stuff, losing all the family. He has nothing left. He might not even have his life tomorrow. But he said, the thing I want the most is I want to know you. I want to know you deeper. I want to have a different type of relationship with you now. He wasn't ready for it before. But now in this moment, in his brokenness, he's ready for that deeper relationship with God. He was holding on to his plans before. He was holding on to his greed. He was holding on to his insecurities. But now, he's holding on to God. So Jacob calls the place Peniel because he's seen God face to face, not in the daylight, but he's seen God in the dark face to face and lived. He's been preserved. But I want us to go back for just a moment to something kind of confusing that he said. God says that Jacob will be called Israel and that he has wrestled with God and prevailed. And you might say, well, no, he didn't. Jacob didn't win. He was at the mercy of God. God broke Jacob's hip just by touching it. How is it that you can say Jacob prevailed against God? That's not what I said. That's not what the verse says. Jacob didn't prevail. Israel did. If you go back and read that verse, Israel prevailed. And Israel didn't prevail against God. Israel prevailed against Jacob. So if you read that verse again, you'll see that. You aren't that old Jacob anymore. You're new Israel. Jacob wrestled with God, but Israel prevailed. That new identity is what came out and won. What God does to Jacob makes him a new person, makes him a stronger person. Even with a limp, he's stronger than he was before. And maybe some of you can testify to that. Maybe some of you in your walk with God, you can say, oh, I've had those experiences. I've wrestled with God. I woke out with a limp. But I can tell you now, I'm stronger with that limp than I was before I wrestled with God. Sometimes God has to break the Jacob inside of you in order that the Israel inside of you might be birthed. Now there's this thing a lot of us say, and I've said it too. It says, and you can probably complete the sentence, God won't put on you more than you can handle. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. God will pile stuff on you, and pile stuff on you, and pile stuff on you, to where you're bent over, you feel like your back's going to break, you hear stuff snap, crackle, and pop. God will weigh you down so much that you'll be crushed underneath the load until you cry out and say, I'm broken. I can't do this on my own. And God says, you're right. You can't do it on your own. You're not supposed to. Let me take that heavy burden from you. He's waiting for us to cry out to him that we need his help. There's something else about New Israel that we need to realize, though. You see, everywhere else in the Bible, when someone's name is changed, their identity is changed, and you never use the old name again. When Abram becomes Abraham, everybody calls him Abraham. When Sarai becomes Sarah, nobody calls her Sarai anymore. She's Sarah now. Every other name change in the Bible, you don't call them by that old name anymore. But with Israel, every once in a while he's called Jacob. And also we notice that two things. He's called Jacob sometimes, but we notice that he is now mentioned, God is now mentioned as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac. And now he's also the God of Jacob. So we see that even in his old name still being used, that even when Israel backslides, even when Israel falls back on its own ways, its old identity, acts like that old trickster, God says, I haven't given up on him. I'm still the God of Jacob. And he says that to you. Even when you backslide, you fall back. You say, we might be new Israel. You say, I'm new, I'm saved. We come to church and we show our Israel side. We might get home, we might show our Jacob side. And I fear that y'all might go home and you'll have this conversation with your spouse later in the week when someone argues and say, oh, I saw that Jacob snake out of me. But sometimes our Jacob kind of pops up in the surface. We act like we still have some of those old Jacob tendencies, just like Israel. But some of you might be nursing a limp this morning. You've grown from it. You might say, hey, I've got a limp, but at least I'm alive still. Can you bless God, even when things look bad, for the fact that you're still alive? Can you just hold on to God in those moments and grow deeper with him? And I wonder if anybody here this morning, y'all are a little bit more Jacob than Israel this morning, maybe. I don't know. Maybe somebody's dealing with something right now. And God has broken you, but you haven't submitted to God yet. And God is standing on the sideline saying, how much do I need to break you before you submit to me? What do I have to do to get you to stop fighting me? So this morning is your chance to stop fighting God and submit your will to him. Will you stop fighting him this morning? Will you come up to this altar and pray? I would love to pray with you if you want to kneel down at the altar. Whatever it is that God leads you to do. Just decide today to stop fighting God. Don't let your fear of stepping out of your comfort zone stop you. Don't walk away from this invitation of God in your life. Don't let it be said that God was in this place, that he was pulling at your heartstrings and you didn't know it, and that you stayed in your seat when God was calling you forward. I want to invite you to come forward as we sing this final hymn. If you aren't a member of the church, we would love to have you join us. You know, it's easier to limp along when you can lock arms with other people who are limping along right with you. We need each other. Don't try to wrestle with God alone. Don't spend the night in the camp all by your lonesome. Walk this path together with your fellow church members as God works in us all, as he redefines us all, as he gives us all that new identity in him and a new name. Would you please come forward at this time?